In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. Now live, welcome everyone to the first ever episode of the Real Leaders Podcast with Erna Grasz. Actually, I think we've done like 140 of these. This is the first one with the Erna Grasz though, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I heard we've got guests from all over the world today. Amazing to see you all here. We're humbled to have you. And please don't be shy. Chat in the box. Ask questions for Erna after the show. Also, folks, if this is the first time you've ever listened to the Real Leaders Podcast, we can't have that. We need you to be a subscriber. We need you to go online to Apple Podcasts, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and subscribe to the Real Leaders Podcast or rate and review the show. I think we'll see a link flying in here shortly, so we'll try to make it as easy as possible. There it is. We'll make it as easy as possible for you all. This is also streaming live on our LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, please connect with us. All of these episodes with leaders from around the world are streamed live to our LinkedIn channel, and we do not want you to miss it. Okay, I've got a fantastic guest here, so let's get this show on the road. Here we go now in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ewers. Joining us today is the CEO and co-founder of Asante Africa Foundation. It's Miss Erna Grasz. Erna, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Super excited to be here.
Very excited. Well, as you mentioned before the show, many guests tuning in. I think you said you had a guest from Uganda, where Asante Africa Foundation is. Well, also in Tanzania. I've got Kenya. So how does one go from Nairobi, Kenya, or from Silicon Valley to Nairobi, Kenya? What were you doing beforehand in Silicon Valley?
Sure. Well, I have had the blessed fortune of being trained as an electrical engineer and a systems engineer. I actually spent the first third of my career working at a Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is a national laboratory where we do a lot of innovation, a lot of state-of-the-art science, a lot of making sure the states are well protected. And in my mid-career, I had the good fortune of going to Silicon Valley. And I was vice president of research and development. I ran a couple of business units in different industries. Pretty life-changing, pretty awesome, and a great set of skill building. So that's a austere career path for a little girl who didn't even know she would get the shot at going to university. So pretty cool.
Well, let's talk about the little girl. Where did you grow up? What got you into engineering in the first place?
Well, engineering was just the good fortune of all of these people who didn't need to care about me, but did. I grew up as a young child with a mom who is a nurse and who was raised as an orphan, and my dad is an immigrant from East Germany. And neither of them had ever finished university at the time. And as a little kid, it wasn't in the cards for me. And what changed is that as I grew up, I had people come into my life, Girl Scout leaders making sure we were fed, school teachers who were checking on us to make sure that everything at home was okay, high school teachers who sat at the kitchen table with me writing scholarship letters so that I would get a shot at university. And the funny story about engineering is that we were looking at ways that I could go to college and get a scholarship with my academic record. And one of my high school teachers said, well, girls can get scholarships in engineering. And I'm like, wow, okay. I said, what do engineers do? He's like, well, I don't know, but you can get a good scholarship.
Exactly.
So we chose electrical engineering, and that helped define my path to the amazing career I've had.
So it seems like you've had a lot of influences, mentors, leaders in your life that helped you get from point A to point B. What does that do to someone growing up that, maybe didn't have those opportunities or didn't see those opportunities clearly on the horizon and is now in a position, like where you are right now?
Well, what Asante Africa started out as is heavily fueled by my own childhood. After my parents divorced, I saw what bad charity could look like.
Mm.
My mom was a nurse working double shifts. I clearly remember her dignity and her pride eroding because of bad charity. People dropping off food that we were either allergic to or didn't like, wearing clothes that didn't fit. And I think as a teenager, that sparked a frustration and an anger in me as a young person, watching my mom's hard efforts getting eroded. And so this organization, and I remember having a conversation with my mom early on about why don't people just ask us what we need instead of assuming. And that fuels what this organization is about. We do not assume. All the solutions are from the ground. All the approaches are led locally. And the two women that I co-founded this organization with are African, and we're equally as passionate about a big vision not being railroaded by outsiders. So it's, and I think the other thing that fueled what our organization is today is that growing up very poor, my mom indoctrinated in us that we were brilliant, we were smart, we had skills, and it's our responsibility to lift other people up coming along behind us, and that was irrelevant of how rich or poor you are. So the whole culture and mentality of paying it forward was infused in us from a very, very early age. And so that's a critical part of what our organization is today. All of our young people pay it forward. All of our teachers pay it forward. All of our staff pay it forward. Everyone has talents that can be shared. So that's another guiding principle of who we are.
I love that, Erna. From your experiences, putting in the work, doing yourself, believing in yourself, and getting somewhere that you maybe didn't think was possible to begin with. Now, you mentioned to your mother, why don't people ask us what we want? They assumed we wanted these clothes, this type of boxed food. What are some of the assumptions people have about East Africa?
Oh man, that's one of my most favorite topics. I think that what I have personally learned through all of my partners, colleagues, staff, young people in Africa, there are a lot of assumptions that, quote, they need to be saved or fixed. And what I know to be true is there's a quote that I love: brilliance and talent are universally distributed. Opportunity is not. And the brilliance, the creativity, the innovation, the entrepreneurship that exudes from pretty much everybody I know in East Africa, all that's needed are doors opened, opportunities created, dots connected. And I learned very frequently that the Western or the Northern mindset gets in the way of what real innovation can be in Africa. One of my co-founders used to tell me frequently, Erna, you're thinking like an American, that won't work here. So, and in many cases, innovation and techniques coming from East Africa is actually more clever, more creative, more innovative than what we might assume over here. So there are so many assumptions. I think another assumption for East Africa is that there's not opportunity there. One of the presidents of Rwanda, he says very frequently, we have the resources we need. They are just not equally distributed or available to everyone. And so in a lot of cases, making that bridge between available resources, marrying it with the talent that's there, and in some cases, just guiding principles or asking the right questions will catapult a team or a person to what's next.
So, Erna, before we go any further down about all the impact Asante Africa is having in Eastern Africa in terms of increasing quality education, especially for females, I'd like to dive into that a little bit later. Let's take our audience back a little bit about the inception point. How did you go from Silicon Valley, C-suite leader to Nairobi, Kenya?
Yes. Well, there's a gentleman who is on this call named Chris Morris who helped us organize a dream bucket trip to climb Kilimanjaro for my husband and I. And after we climbed Kilimanjaro, we did the whole safari thing. And Chris Morris actually connected me to the two co-founders that helped launch this organization. I met an amazing young Tanzanian woman named Emmy Moshi, and she was trying to start her safari business as an entrepreneur, and when it was difficult for women to even own a vehicle. And she was needing to build a school in a community as a part of her give back. And then I was also introduced to a very powerful, passionate Maasai woman who was one of the first school principals. And Helen had this big vision of how little girls should not be married off at ages 9 and 10, but they should be in school. And I got to know these two powerful women. I came back to Silicon Valley, sitting on the freeway, commuting an hour and a half each way. And because of the time zones, my 5 a.m. equated to their evening. So over a year, I just began to call Emmy and Helen and talk to them about their challenges and their dreams and their vision for their communities. And over that year, I could begin to see that maybe there was a role an outsider could play in helping accelerate their vision. And it started out as all about just the opportunity of getting into a classroom and not having to live with a future that wasn't chosen. We wanted these little girls and little boys to have a choice about what their dream would be. And so 3 slightly crazy women set up this organization, and without any awareness of what it could become. And it's I would say naivety and lack of awareness of where the brick walls are probably helped us launch this. If I knew what I knew today, I'm not so sure I would do it again.
So help our audience out. Give us some context. How big is the foundation right now?
Well, we've gone from 3 slightly crazy women to an organization that has about 45 staff and employees. They, everyone in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda are locals, and they live in the communities where we work. And here in the U.S., we're very blessed and fortunate to have we have about 40 volunteers, and we have about 6 part-time paid staff who help run the back office engine. And our organization today, we are driven by educating and empowering young people, ages about 4th grade through high school, about staying safe, knowing their health rights, having a social network to keep them safe, and skill build to help them see their vision for their own futures and their families, and develop the skills to either create jobs or take jobs. So by the time they get out of high school, our goal is that they are self-sufficient and can go chase that dream with the skills we've given them.
I love it. Now, Erna, you mentioned there's people tuning in today from all around the world. You yourself had your own experience in Mount Kilimanjaro. Help our audience understand the circumstances for the individuals in East Africa.
Sure. Well, I will say that there's a difference whether we work in off the paved road communities, very, very deep rural communities. Many of the children that we work with still live day to day in a mud hut. Many of our children have never seen road pavement. All their roads are dirt roads. And in many cases, the communities are either nomadic, livestock agriculture is their way of life. And it's a beautiful way of life. In Africa, where we work, it's really around bringing knowledge and awareness to these communities so that they can hold culture in one hand and knowledge in the other hand, and just create choice for themselves and their families without outsiders judging, and just be aware of what's possible.
Erna, let's talk some numbers really quick. I think on your website you said there's a 58% unemployment rate in a few of these countries, and there's 61 million girls that don't have access to quality education. Maybe dive into the specifics a little bit about why you think that is.
Oh, goodness. Well, I would say that what's going on the continent is that there's a youth bulge. 62% of the population on the Africa continent today is between 15 and 29. And no matter how fast the economy is growing, the youth population is coming of age faster than that growth. Mm. So there are sort of three dimensions of struggle in these different countries. One is absolutely poverty and surviving. If you don't have enough food for your family, the whole concept of buying a school uniform is out of reach. So rural poverty is one. Lack of awareness and knowledge is definitely another. If we don't know any different, it's really difficult to change mindsets. And then the third piece is, and the thing about awareness is it's about opportunities could be just outside of your sphere and you wouldn't be aware of it. So it's awareness and knowledge.
Interesting.
And then the third dimension are systems and structures. Without corruption, with all the innovators going on the continent of Africa, in a lot of cases, something as simple as registering your business without your idea getting stolen is really difficult. So the governments are working on systems and structures, and we as nonprofits or social impact organizations can educate the communities and the youth who are the change makers of the future. They can be bringing new knowledge in. And then we're building this divide of where are the jobs, where are the investment funds, and how do we help these young people secure those investment funds for their ideas. Africa has this explosion of economic opportunity. Businesses, they are more advanced than we are in many cases with mobile banking. So in a lot of cases, they're leapfrogging what we know here on the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes, go into that a little bit more, Erna. Explain what the leapfrog is to our viewers listening to this for the first time, and what are some of the opportunities that are in Africa right now, such as you mentioned, mobile banking.
Yeah. Well, so when I go to Africa, the young people are routinely teaching me about all the newest apps. The apps are out in the ether, and we either aren't aware of it or haven't needed those apps. So I'm always curious about the innovations. So for example, young people in Africa born today, they are being born digitally literate. They do not know a life without a mobile phone or a tablet or something that's digital, just like here. But the problem, the uniqueness to them is they've never been introduced to a laptop or a desktop. So they go from nothing to mobile device, and their brain is not hindered by contained thinking about a desktop or a laptop. So when they are designing apps and when they are designing code,
right,
they are not having to look back. Mobile banking. In the rural communities, nobody trusts banks, or banks are not even available. So now their phones, you can get loans on the phones, you can save on your phone, you can, when I go to a grocery store in Nairobi or Uganda, no one uses currency anymore. You're at the grocery store and you're entering in their mobile code to transfer money. So the whole concept around Bitcoin, it will scale and launch on the continent of Africa much faster than here. Things like that, just amazing innovation.
So why do you think that is, though? Also, because like I heard, cryptocurrency in Africa is also pertaining to the illegitimacy of like the, current currency in the nation, whether it's corruption in the nation, whether it's inflation, avoiding taxes, some of the things that are benefits of a decentralized platform. Why do you think that the younger generation is adopting this technology so quickly, and then what are the other benefits of using a decentralized app that uses let's say just I don't know, fake money or cryptocurrency or mobile exchanges?
Well, I don't know if it's fake currency, but I think the whole concept of not having to have tangible paper is becoming more of a norm there than in the Northern Hemisphere.
Okay.
I think in many cases, I'll give you another great example of some of our rural youth. So in many of the communities where we live and work, girls, for religious purposes or cultural purposes, can't necessarily work alongside boys, especially if they're single. And the ability to help young girls be able to work behind a keyboard, it's agnostic to who is actually the work being provided by. So a group of our young women decided to start their own software support organization, and they literally sit in a mud hut with a hotspot, scanning documents, uploading, and making money. And it's 5 young ladies sitting in a mud hut of Muslim origin, and now they are becoming quite the heroes because they can put food on the table for their families. So that level of, while the innovation isn't in the job itself, the approach of offering a service is extremely clever and innovative.
Yeah, and my bad. I didn't mean to say fake money. It's just what is currency? It's a means of exchange. It's whatever I'll take for what you want to give me. And it throughout the history of time maybe has changed. So what can we learn from East Africa in this sense, in this leapfrog approach, where they're coming out with these mobile devices, they're in these mud huts making money through their entrepreneurial business? Like, what can we take away from what's going on in East Africa?
Thank you for asking that question. One of the things that I am frequently educating those of us who live in the Northern Hemisphere is that there is a great deal of cross-cultural learning and just simple things around innovation for sure. But I've also asked myself a similar question of why are we as Northerners so enamored with the continent of Africa? Why are we all going there on safaris? What is it that's pulling us? And what is it that pulls us back? And I think I've spent a decade sort of analyzing this. And in many, many cases, what is evident to me is that the African community is still living true to many of their value systems. The essence of what community is still in their genetics, in their DNA. What a neighborhood is, what a village is, being there for each other during hardships. You may not have meals. So I'll give you an example of that during COVID. We were delivering food to our children and their families. We provided enough food for a family of 5. And one of the mothers said to us, she said, I am a co-wife to a man, and there are 5 families, 5 wives. She said, your food that you're providing us is not feeding 5. You're feeding about 30, because we are sharing this food with our co-wives and their families. So something as simple as community in our individualistic world, we have lost some of that. That's one. Another one is to listen to each other. Africa is a very relationship-oriented continent, and the concept of trust and building trust before you do business is a very real factor. As well as just the joy, the spirituality and the joy on the continent. When you have to create your own fun, when you have to create your own toys, when you have to create your own entertainment, it usually translates to music, dance, skits, comedy, and there's such a innate talent that I think we are beginning to lose. We have to really work at keeping that here.
Seems like you have a good pulse on the culture, obviously, and it's really good to understand this. Now, what to you makes a good ecosystem? I know you all have a unique approach and a unique model for how you want to scale and how you want to, use these different resources to improve the quality of education as a whole, because we know all of these things are so interconnected. So to you, Erna, what makes up a good ecosystem?
Yeah. We've had, over our last decade as an organization, we've had so many conversations around, why don't you just build school desks? Why don't you just give scholarships? And when we think about what a child needs to flourish and believe in themselves and build academic learning, it's so much more than a desk or a pencil. In some cases, it's needing to know that an adult cares. In some cases, it's making sure that you don't get jumped on the way home from school by some boy in the village. In some cases, it's food. Many of the reasons young children go to school is so they can get a meal. So it's this ecosystem with the child at the center of how do we empower that child to believe you are worthy. I view a huge part of my job is holding up this mirror so that my staff, the young people, begin to see themselves in that mirror as brilliant, worthy, talented, worthy of having a dream. And then we are there as mentors and guides on that journey. with them doing the hard work. I think the critical thing about our ecosystem is nothing's for free. Everyone has to be a part of the approach and the solution. The children have to put in the hard work of learning. Our programs are probational. If you're not carrying your weight, you don't get to keep the scholarship. We support the parents. The parents have to be a part of making sure they're visiting the children. And I had one parent say, I can't read. How do I help my teenager who's now smarter than me? And one of the other parents said, look for the red X's and the green check marks. Ask them questions. Make sure that they have light before the candles burn out to study. So having this ecosystem of the parents, Asante Africa, the educators, the community leaders advocating for children having a right to education. This ecosystem supporting this child is paramount, with everybody doing their part. And one of the indicators of whether we know this ecosystem is working is that if our staff is in a conversation and they are talking about the Asante Africa program, we know our model's not working. If it's working, they refer to the program as our program, our scholarship program, our girls adolescents program, our entrepreneurship program. And
Right.
so we hear the language of their ownership. We know that as we back up, they are owning the whole program.
So this decentralized approach of leadership, taking ownership for your own education, is something that we've spoken about in terms of sustainability. It's a scalable model. It's something that, maybe some charities could learn from and adopt this, more of this take ownership model versus I'm going to give you, a desk model in layman's terms. So Erna, maybe explain to our audience, your philosophy on sustainable, philanthropy and why you chose to structure this business as a nonprofit versus a for-profit.
Sure. And I'll be really honest, we struggle with that question on a daily basis around a business, a B Corp versus a social impact organization versus a nonprofit.
We left off at sustainable philanthropy. You're giving me 3 models. Let's start with the first one.
The first one is all about programmatic sustainability. Can the program survive beyond our introduction or support? The second one is financial sustainability. Can these young people sustain their ideas and innovation? Can the organization sustain itself with funding coming from inside the countries? And then the third is the governance sustainability. Do we have strong enough systems and structures in place to support managing against corruption? Strong enough leadership at our board level for oversight and internal controls. So those are sort of how we measure long-term thriving. Sustainability is the phrase everyone's using.
I think that's one of the biggest traits of leadership, leaving things better than you found them. When you leave the organization, is it able to survive? I think that's the one thing a lot of entrepreneurs miss when they're designing their companies, because usually it could be an ego thing. It could be a, profit-driven venture that they start, and they're not thinking about how do I sustain a company so that when I leave it will better. And I think that comes down to leadership. So maybe some advice now. I heard this is a leadership podcast. Maybe we should talk about it. What builds trust in an organization? And how do you know, Erna, when you leave this organization, it's going to be able to not skip a beat?
I think so what's fascinating about this year is we are all learning about ourselves as leaders in the moment of crisis. What I see, I have always been a very, very firm believer that leadership isn't about getting it right. Leadership is about setting a path and guiding the team on that path, and being humble enough that maybe I don't have all the answers. And in many cases within our organization, it's very rare that I have the answers. The answers are typically coming from inside the countries. What I try to do and what I encourage everyone to do is to speak truth, speak ground truth. Do not necessarily give the boss what you think they want to hear, but give them what they need to hear. And I think a huge part is staying humble. You know, I have made so many mistakes along the way. And the moment that I am alerted that, Erna, you're wrong, or that won't work, or you screwed up, I've always been trained, when you know you've made a mistake, bow and bow low. And regardless and acknowledging it openly and humbly that I ain't all that some days. So that's probably another one. And I think the other element that we all strive for in our organization, every one of us is a leader. Every one of us has the worthiness of sitting at the table of decisions. We each have a different role to play, but we are all successful contributors to the bigger solution. I once was told a phrase that I hold very dear. If we are fixing, we are working from a place of brokenness. If we are helping, we are inferring hopelessness. But if we are serving, we are working from a place of we can all come together and create a better solution collaboratively than what any of us could do on our own. Mm. So there's a phrase within Swahili that we use a lot, tuko pamoja, we are together. Mm. And that phrase is a huge part of guiding us. I think one of the most humorous things that I was told by my Uganda country manager last week, I went and did some photography recently, and one of the pictures of me was me in a tree. And the Uganda country manager, he said, Erna, you might be the only CEO that I know that climbs trees. And for me, that was a very powerful message that he gave me, that we don't want this hierarchy. We don't want titles. We want everyone's comparable contribution. And that is probably an attribute that we are building into this organization that is quite different from Africa organizations. They are, many African organizations are still working from a very hierarchical footprint. And we are trying to create more of the round table footprint.
Now, Erna,
so
go for it. Well, I was going to say, now, if you were to go back to Silicon Valley, how would you lead differently?
You know, personally, I think Africa was brought into my life because when I worked in Silicon Valley, I was coming from a much more driving my destiny framework. I was probably a much harsher personality. I was, as a woman executive, as a woman engineer, I spent much of my career trying to fit and wear the uniform of all my colleagues. And in many cases, I think I lost myself along that way. And so I think how I would lead differently now is there is no work-life balance. It's all an integrated lifestyle.
Mm.
If you're going through a divorce at home, the probability of being high performing at work is pretty low. And just acknowledging that we need to give each other some space to just be human, I think is another collateral benefit that's coming out of COVID.
Hmm.
I think just all of us recognizing that we all wear different uniforms at different times of the day. And right now we're all seeing each other's backgrounds and struggles wearing those different uniforms. So that would be different for me now.
Interesting. So interesting. Now, when you say like integrating, the work and life together, a lot of people say, well, you need balance, you need time off. But I think what you're saying is, this needs to be integrated, needs to be together, needs to be a part of, your daily life. How do you see your work and your, life right now, your lifestyle right now? And how do you kind of harmonize those two?
Not well.
But you said you like it though. You said that this is kind of why you like it now. Okay.
Well, I have been a researcher and studier of leadership my whole life. And I think now what I am looking for is the universal truths. What are the universal truths that are regardless of context? And I think COVID is the pandemic has surfaced many of these universal truths more to the surface. And, each of us, no one is perfect. We all fall. We all make mistakes. I've often been told watching you go from point A to point B is actually pretty messy. And I actually have paused and thought about that maybe messy is okay if I'm at least moving in the direction of true north. Maybe these curves and detours will bring out some learning that I need. And just being, Africa has brought to light that nothing goes according to plan.
Right.
And in many cases, when we try to force it, like I used to do, goal setting, Erna, here by this date, this much money by this date. When I was driving my destiny, I didn't have time to smell the roses. I didn't have time to look for additional learning. And so as a leader, it's prioritizing. It's allowing the laughter of the neighborhood kids to pull me out of my office to go out into the street and play with the kids. It's the joy of being in nature. Some of those things the African context hasn't yet lost, that we are trying to re-find. So yeah, I think some of the universal truths for me, and these are generalizations, but I believe them to be true, is that every mama in this world has a heart and a love for their child, regardless of where that child is born. Every father wants their family to be safe and secure and every man wants to be recognized and respected and appreciated for what he brings. And every child would like to have big dreams and inherently trusts adults. And we want that for them, right? We want their innocence to be supported. And I think another universal truth is we can all have a role to play. It might not be the implementer. It might be our role to play is dot connecting, funding, opening doors. And we all have a role to play. We just need to rethink from where we come from what that role is globally. And I think another universal truth is each of us needs our spirituality, our values to guide us, whether that's culture, whether that's religion, whether that's connected to the earth, whether that's whatever we define that to be, we need that to have a more fulfilled life. So those are a few universal truths.
It's so, I think what you said is just so powerful. You're embracing this uncertainty now. You have come to East Africa, and it has changed you as a person, and how you perceive the world, and how you're still searching for these answers. It's just powerful stuff, and so here's a question I just wanted to ask. I've never been to Tanzania. Want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro? Let's make it happen. Haven't been to Uganda. Certainly want to visit Kenya. What do you love so much about the people there?
Their joyful nature, their willingness to include you in their world with excitement, their pride of culture, and their desire to not lose their heritage and culture. That's very powerful. I'll give you a great example of just one of my last trips. I was in a vehicle with my staff going down this dirt road in northern Kenya. And I remember saying to my staff, "Can we stop the car? I just want to take a picture." And they're all like looking around like, "What are you going to take a picture of?" And I said, "We don't have hundreds of camels in our backyards. We don't have camels at all in our backyards." And they were like, "You don't have camels?" And so there was literally about 100 camels walking by.
Wow.
That they thought it's just ordinary life.
Right.
And it's so cool to be in this world that's so authentic. And it just helps us see the goodness and the beauty of what every country, what every community brings. So you have to go. It's the joyful nature of the people will bring you back year after year, no question. And
I want to go, definitely. I definitely want to go. We had this conversation like a couple weeks ago because you were like, "Oh, I actually do really respect Akon's work, in Senegal. There's another country I want to go with." I want to hear your take on this because Akon, he's building this futuristic city. It's going to be sustainably sourced food, powered by alternative energy. It's going to be using their Acoin cryptocurrency as the main means of exchange for entrepreneurs, business entrepreneurs, any tech entrepreneurs, like you mentioned, the dApps, decentralized apps. So how do you see this actually changing? I've heard kind of both sides of the coin. How do you see this installment in Senegal going?
I have tremendous respect for what Akon is trying to achieve. And it may not be perfect. And what he is doing on the continent, he is showing that the brilliance and talent is in-house. He is showing that collectively as an African continent, we can look after our own people, that we have the resources and the talent and the skill to do it. He is going to show the outside world that when you eliminate corruption and the external influences, he's going to show that it can work. And he is a brilliant role model to young people coming up behind him. I have a lot of respect for what he's trying to do with just sharing his story and speaking truth to the younger generation of, you don't have to go abroad. You can thrive and be wealthy and successful here without looking to the outside world. Now, that doesn't mean the outside world doesn't have a role to play, but they can be the architect of their own futures. They can be the architect of their own destinies, and they can engage us as partners without feeling less than. That's wicked powerful. And the fact that he's this phenomenal artist at the same time gives him additional street cred. So I solely support him, and I heavily suspect that as he shows the validity of his model, there's going to be a lot of other organizations trying to do what he's doing.
Yeah, I think just a visionary as a whole, and I think you hit the nail on the head. He's going to run into some challenges, but those are good. We're going to learn a lot from kind of his progress, what they are doing. It's not just him; it's many, many people, many investors into this as well. Okay, Erna, I just wanted that last question. I know that's just an interesting topic for me. I want to hear from you, someone who's on the ground. Many examples of leaders today, many examples of leadership. Erna, I mean, you started, maybe not having as many opportunities as other people, having some female role models in your life to say, hey, take this scholarship with the engineers. It's a great opportunity for you. To then being a goal-driven Erna in Silicon Valley, to having this overwhelming experience in Mount Kilimanjaro, making a transition, founding Asante Africa. So all of these experiences together, let's bring this home, Erna. What is your definition of a real leader?
So I have two awesome mentors, Jim Kouzis and Barry Posner. They have developed a series called Exemplary Leadership and the Leadership Challenge. And the definition that speaks to me is leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations.
Ooh.
And the reason that is so powerful for me is when I think about the word art, it's each person can paint their own canvas of what leadership looks like in their world. And a good leader, we're a great example. We know what we do is hard. If it were easy, everyone could have done it before us. But we are choosing to struggle together toward our true north and shared aspirations of what a brilliant continent is going to look like.
Powerful. Erna, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I hope you hang around for a few questions after the show. But for Erna Grasz, I'm Kevin Edwards asking you to go out there, mobilize others, help them paint their own canvas, folks, and always keep it real. Thanks, Erna. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Well, again, such a pleasure to speak with you today, Erna. I know we had a few questions flying in for everyone listening right now on LinkedIn and on Crowdcast. You can ask Erna your own questions in the chat box on the right. Now, let's kick it off. We've got one question flying in. This one comes from Julie. She asked, thank you for elevating others who needed support. What can people listening do to help advance your organization's efforts?
Thank you for asking, Julie. Please go to our website, asanteafrica.org. And if you are here in the US, we would love to talk to you about volunteering, sharing of your own talents with our organization. If you have the means, of course, funding money fuels the vision, and tell other people about us. We are truly a grassroots organization with a mighty vision, and we need everyone's support to reach the next million children.
Erna, this question comes from Noah. It looks like it's a similar question. He asked, Real Leaders interviewed Akon earlier this year about bringing his cryptocurrency Akon to Africa and his plans to make it the official currency of Africa. Okay, do you see this as a possibility?
Yes, for sure. I do. It may take longer than we expect, but I definitely see digital currency as a path that in a decade will become very normal for us.
Erna, I was curious also about the 61 million, I believe it was, females who don't have access to a quality education. Like, what are their circumstances? And I know you said it's different in each of these countries, but like, what really is it that there's such a parallel between the females and the males in those areas?
Sure. Well, a real life example is probably always the best. If you are a father with 7 children and you personally earn less than $2 a day, the concept of having to buy a uniform for your child to go to school at $35, $40 is out of reach. So you will probably pick one of your 7 children to invest in. And typically, because of culture, that has been the boy child.
Interesting.
So helping parents understand the need to educate their girls is paramount. Another great example is one of the fathers in Kenya, who's a Maasai herder, took his 5th grade daughter to the bank with him because he's illiterate. And she is the one that caught that the bank teller left a 0 off the deposit slip. Once she helped him, he began to see the power of his daughters getting education. So the context that these girls are living in is that in a lot of cases, and during COVID, it's been exacerbated because if the parents are losing their jobs, everyone is having to go hustle and find money and food. But the girls get locked into taking care of the children at home, going to get the firewood, going to get the water. And in a lot of cases, education becomes out of reach. So for the girls that we sponsor and the boys, the girls, we want to make sure they're in boarding schools if at all possible. They get food, they get light, they get sleep. They don't have to go back and forth to school. They have tutorers and mentors in academics. They have access to different programming and counseling that they need desperately. So in a lot of cases, is putting them into what we call a safe space helps them have a better shot at education and staying the path. Right now, only 28% of girls go beyond grade 7. And that is purely a financial wall. If they have a scholarship, they can keep going. It's simple things like that. And in our world, $1,000 a year will provide top tier education for a child to have food, uniforms, healthcare, books, exam fees, tutoring, leadership development. So it's a low cost aggregated over 12 months with an incredibly high payoff.
Here's one of the things that I don't think I asked you a deep enough question about. All of these problems, I guess, let's just say quality education, it's very interconnected. So whether it's access to clean water, a safe night's sleep, I know when Akon brought solar panels and street lights, it reduced the crime in the area, people walking home from school, less violence. Like you mentioned when you were growing up, food, clothes that fit you, what are some of the problems in your ecosystem that you've invested in to improve the quality of education that does not pertain to teaching, books, desks, curriculum, things like that?
A really simple one is water being brought to schools, and we usually do that in partnership with a water nonprofit, and girls' toilets. If girls cannot manage their menstrual cycles when they go to school, if there's no place or no safe place, they will not go to school. So something as building toilets, which sounds silly, but hygiene is everything for a young girl who's hitting puberty, who might not even know what menstruation is. Something that simple is a game changer. And making sure, one of the mothers during COVID, she said to us, "You may have brought food to nourish our stomachs, but the fact that you have bought hygiene products has saved the dignity of my 4 daughters and myself." And they hadn't left the house for a month because they hadn't had any materials to take care of themselves. So that holistic health, hygiene, water, sanitation is very, very instrumental. And it's all about dignity, everyone being able to keep their dignity and their pride, and accepting help in a way that doesn't denigrate, is that the right word? Denigrate their self-esteem and their self-efficacy.
I do buy that, because we had on the founder of the World Toilet Organization, and it was like half of the world's population doesn't have access to clean water and sanitization, or just sanitization in general, which includes toilets and things like that. How did COVID impact your towns, your organizations? Is this something they were used to, let's say, from other diseases maybe that could have been in the area? What was the reaction, and what did you do on the ground there?
COVID has been an interesting time for our organization to prove their worth and their value in the local communities. And I will also say we have had many, many collateral benefits come out of COVID. So this pandemic has actually brought a lot of goodness to our organization. For the children themselves, I think the biggest learning for us is that a school is so much more than a place to learn. It is truly, truly a safe space where children can congregate and learn and socialize and be supported and get food and have a principal or a teacher to go to if they're being abused at home, just like here in the US. Being sequestered to a home in rural communities where there's no electricity, no network, no immediate access to food. Your parents have lost their jobs. Tremendous hardship. And what we noticed right away was our young people over the years, our teens, have risen to the occasion. We had young people immediately start creating YouTube videos in the local language about myths versus reality of COVID. Many of the parents had never even seen a face mask. We have one video of the parents trying to put the mask on different parts of their body. We had a situation of a child drinking out of the hygiene tap to wash your hands because he thought it was a water fountain. Simple things like that. Why would you waste water that you go to the river to drink? Why would you waste it for hand washing? Right. So all these learnings the young people took on, and we began to provide them with local language flyers. Several of our youth created a radio program where they went on the air from 8 to 10 at night, and it was for teens. where they could ask anything. And like the first week was about COVID. The second week was about sexual abuse and staying safe. The third week was about, it began to pick a taboo topic, substance abuse, mental abuse. And what they did is they had all their friends call in to the radio station with the taboo questions that you wouldn't normally get to ask. So it became a very lively dialogue. We had 142 young people start different businesses over the last 6 months. Masks, liquid soap. One group of young men started using their motorcycles for Uber food delivery for the elderly people who didn't have transport. So innovation at its best.
Seriously, though, wow, I'm so happy for you all. I'm glad we were all able to connect. It just gives me such hope, that you mentioned most of the population is within the age of 15 to 29 years old. Much upside there, and to leapfrog what we know here in the West is something that's spectacular, and I'm going to be paying more close attention to it here in the upcoming years, especially in 2021. Erna, it's been a pleasure having you on. Folks, we've got the link there in the description or in the chat box, asanteafrica.org. Again, folks, if you want to listen to this episode, it should be edited and published by this Saturday or Sunday. So you don't want to miss it. We'll make sure we edit it, take out that little part where we were able to, we disconnected. Oh, that's the beauty of editing, isn't it? So go online to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. Let us know what you think and what others can expect when they land on the channel. Erna, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Erna.
Okay, thank you.